All right, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We have a special guest. We have Sam here today, one of my dear friends and colleagues who is going to talk to us about hotline calls, the ins and outs of answering calls, crisis calls from folks, and give us some best practices and tips. So let's start off with a little bit of housekeeping and kind of give you a rundown on how to use the new platform. All right. So of course, we'd first like to thank the Office of Violence Against Women for funding our programs and especially the webinars that we do. Y'all know how much I love these heckin' webinars. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. All right. So, during this time when we can't be in person together and in the same room, we are wanting to be as interactive as possible. So this webinar is interactive. There's many different ways how you can interact with not only me, but also Sam, okay? So let's go through some of these right now. So this is what your webinar control panel should look like. So the first thing that we will be utilizing is the Q&A button. So this is very similar to how we used to use the question box in our previous webinars. So if you have a question, you can send it anonymously as well for one of our panelists. Just go ahead and click that and type in your question and submit. And then I'll get it and I'll ask Sam. And then the next thing is going to be the raise hand button. So if Samurai asks a question, you can raise your hand and we can kind of get like a group consensus, right? How many of you love hoarding cats? And then, everyone will raise their hand, right? All right, so this button is to open your chat, and this is used to communicate with other webinar attendees, to communicate with me. I will be monitoring that throughout the chat and updating Sam if there's any questions or comments or anything like that. And part of this is that you wanna change your setting right here. It's a little drop-down menu. Change it from panelists to all panelists and attendees, so that when you're sending messages, that you can send them to everyone and you can engage in that conversation. Okay. And yes, I am the bearer of free CEUs, and just like all other webinars that we've done, well, most other webinars, this one does have an hour of CEUs available. So tomorrow, check your email. You will get an email that has the link to the CEU quiz, and fill that out. And if you get 70% or more, then I will send you a CEU certificate, okay? All right, so let's get started. So today we're going to talk about best practices for advocates responding to hotline calls. So this is, something that Sam is well versed in. She's very experienced in. She runs the link line, the 24/7 domestic violence crisis hotline for the state of Utah. And she has a lot of really great tips, a lot of great experience. So if you have questions, definitely ask those questions, because we will hope to get those answered today. And if you have those questions, chances are someone else attending will also have those questions. So, all right. So here are some objectives that we are going to go over. So we are going to understand what a crisis is and even what it's not, okay? I know that we, kind of hear that word, frequently, throughout our daily lives. And so we're going to break that down and kind of give you that information on what it is and what it isn't. Also the different types of crisis, okay? And how crisis intervention can be used to, help that person going through crisis and offer support. So we are going to explore best practices like I was talking about, and talk about resources that are available in the community. All right, so let's talk a little bit about who the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition is. So we are the federally recognized state coalition for the state of Utah. So every state has a coalition. Some coalitions are dual, so they have sexual violence and domestic violence. Utah just happens to be one of the states that has separate coalitions, right? And it just depends on what works for your state. Okay, so if you're unsure, definitely do a little internet search and find out who your coalition is, right? And see if they're dual or if they're separate. Okay, so we provide a number of supports for folks who are working directly with survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So we do this through trainings, webinars, site visits, technical assistance. And remember, technical assistance on a coalition level is, you calling in, you emailing one of us and saying, hey, what are some tips? What are, the best practices for working with da-da-da-da-da? Or, hey, I have this issue, or I am facing this barrier working with a survivor. Do you have any resources or suggestions? And that's a lot of what we do. Me and Sam, a lot of our job is technical assistance. So remember that we are available, and our contact information will be at the end of this. So if you do have any questions, reach out to us, okay? Reach out to us and we'll see what we can do to help support you and the survivors you're working with. All right, so here's my slide. A little intro on me before we hand it over to Sam. All right, so my name is Andy Tremonti and I use they, them, their pronouns. And I'm the Education Outreach Coordinator for the Coalition. So that means that I'm over the education, the webinars, presentations, trainings that the Coalition offers. For example, next week, we're starting a 40-hour core advocacy training. So that's, kind of what I do. That's my wheelhouse. And the outreach part of my job is I specialize in Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA survivors. So that is where a bulk of not only my experience, lived experience, and my education comes from. So. And the most important part of this slide is, again, that I'm a Sasquatch enthusiast. So that is something that Sam and I kind of share. I'm just gonna release your secret here, Sam, is sometimes we like talking about Sasquatch. So this is what I'm working on this week. I have a set of tiles that I'm trying to paint up, and this is as far as I've gotten, and they've been sitting on my coffee table for probably about a week, but we'll see if I pick that up again. Here's my sweet cat, Todico. They may come into the shot throughout the webinar, and same with little Jorge. This is an actual video of me actively avoiding doing yard work this week. So if you look at my yard and it's not very well maintained, it is what it is. So, all right, so we are going to turn the time over to Sam. All right, Sam, I will stop sharing and allow you to share your screen.
Sure, perfect. And through this, I don't know if I am able to show video. It's saying that the host has stopped it. Do you want me to run through the presentation on my end, or do you want to click through?
You can do it, and we can show video. There is a setting that if you click more and then the three dots, it will allow you to share your computer audio.
Okie dokie. Well, I've got my audio, so I'm pretty good on that. It's the video that. Yeah,
it should be good. It's been working really well with other Zoom webinars. So.
Just pulling that up here. All right, so while I'm getting this set up on my end, my name is Sam. As Andy had said before, I work for the Coalition. I am the link line coordinator for the UDVC. I started off as a volunteer several years ago, just doing hotline work. And from there, I just so happened to get roped in per my school schedule, and really through a series of just chance opportunities, I got included in the Coalition work. So yeah, pretty much all I've been doing when it comes to the Coalition is maintaining hotline work. And working through that. So I'm pretty, like I said, aware of how hotlines function. And yeah, any questions that you might have around that, please feel free to ask as I am able to answer some questions. And so Andy, real quick, I was just getting the webinar, or not the webinar, the presentation pulled up. You said the 3 dots are where on this? Oh, I'm just sharing my screen here. Cool, got it pulled up. Let's just go from current slide. Okay, skipping through Andy's here. Okay, so yeah, I've got my bachelor's in social work. In the future, I will be trying to pursue a master's, likely in social work. Just right now, it doesn't feel like the most opportune time to, well, get involved in in-person schooling. Yeah, I do have past history working with folks with disabilities for several years. It's not included in this slide. I do use she, her pronouns. Yeah, I mean, really, this is a little bit about me. We're talking about introductions here. My whole life has kind of been centered around the lore of The Legend of Zelda. Really, I think that from a really young age, I was incredibly inspired to be just a like wholesome figure within my community from this video game, from Link in the game. So I hold that pretty near and dear to my heart. I've written quite a few collegiate papers on what this universe sort of means to me and how it's impacted my ability and desire to want to serve folks within my community. I also would not be an associate of Andy's if I didn't have some affiliation with Dungeons and Dragons. That would be Andy's doing. Thank you, Andy, and everybody who gets close to Andy, watch out, because you will eventually get roped in.
No problem, Sam. I just want to support you through life, okay?
Of course, and it's not problematic. I actually really do enjoy it, so it's pretty cool. Also, you'll note, if you're familiar with diners, drive-ins, and dives, I have a low-key fun obsession with Guy Fieri through Food Network. Just think he's a wholesome dude. So yeah, that's kind of my thing, kind of the kicks I've been on recently in quarantine. And then we'll just pop through here and show you some pictures of my little Rube Cube, my little pepperoni. Love her to death. And yeah, she's just she is my sanity through all of this. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. If you have any other questions, you want to know more about apparently Guy Fieri or apparently, Zelda or Dungeons and Dragons, hit me or Andy up. But let's get into like really what we're here to get into, is talking about crisis intervention on hotline calls and how you manage that. So what is a crisis? A crisis is any event that is or is expected to lead to an unstable and dangerous situation affecting an individual, group, community, or whole society. A crisis isn't just a moment of stress, right? When you're in stress, and note that stress can be many forms of stress. You can be in distress, you can be in eustress from like a positive event that's occurring in your life. A crisis and the feelings of crisis don't come from just like the standard stress that you experience in day-to-day life. Getting into crisis mode and falling into that is actually a traumatic response. In typical stressful situations, your body kind of relies back on itself to return to a state of homeostasis. Whereas when you're dealing with that sort of like traumatic stress that will lead to falling into crisis mode, your body is kind of shut down. The mental capacities, the physical capacities, all that stuff, you're unable to navigate that. You're unable to rely on that, which, pushes you towards a moment or moments of crisis that you could be experiencing. And again, this is not something that is individual, which we'll talk about, necessarily individual anyway. It can impact, have a global experience, potentially, depending on the level of crisis that folks are going through. Some things with a crisis, just some predictable characteristics here. it's unexpected unless you're working in the crisis intervention field and working, like for the Domestic Violence Coalition on a crisis hotline. You don't really wake up in the morning and think like, gee whiz, I'm going to deal with crisis today. It's not something that comes up. It's something that really kind of comes out of left field for folks. They're not expecting it. It could be, they still could be having an incredibly tumultuous experience in their life and series of events. That's absolutely possible, but it's not something that people are expecting to occur at any given moment necessarily. Oftentimes I think that, at least in my experience on hotline calls, and gosh, even in my own lived experience, I guess, that it's what puts people into crisis mode is kind of this, that maybe sometimes the smaller incident that is the straw that broke the camel's back. It's not something that is necessarily the most extreme situation that the person is experiencing. It's just the thing that finally pushes that capacity for maintaining homeostasis to, like, pushes it just kind of over the edge, and they get thrown into crisis mode. It does create that uncertainty for folks. It's something that, when you're in crisis mode, you can't, it's almost like a wall is thrown up right in front of you, and you can't see past it. You can't see around it. You don't know how to get over it, under it, any of that stuff. It's just, it creates anything, any goals, anything, jumping into the next part, anything that you were maybe trying to strive for or obtain or get to or anything like that is potentially interrupted, and you're unable to see how and make sense of the current situation at hand. Like I was just saying, it is seen as a threat to important goals, whatever those goals might be. It could be, the goals that you have of, maintaining a job, of getting to safety, of, going to school. I mean, whatever a goal looks like, that crisis is going to potentially impact how you feel yourself being able to successfully access that. And really, in order to get out of crisis mode, change has to occur. You can't just keep running into that same brick wall that you threw up when you hit the crisis mode. You've got to figure out a way to carve a new path to get around that. And that's, of course, it's not necessarily just up to the one individual. The social support aspect is incredible in helping folks get around the crisis mode that they're experiencing. But really, you do have to figure out some way, some change to get away, to break away from the crisis that one is experiencing. So yeah, talking about just like some different levels of crisis and what that could look like. I mean, if we're talking like individual crisis, especially on a crisis hotline, that's a caller calling in and saying, we just had an explosive incident. I left my partner. I don't know what to do. I am going to be homeless now. How do I navigate that? How do I get shelter? How do I do anything? How do I get to shelter if I don't have a car? Those types of things. A group crisis, even just expanding it into like a familial crisis, in something that, let's just say, like, you maybe have like a death in the family, could be a crisis. Some type of unexpected, serious medical event could be a crisis. Domestic violence in a family setting, of course, could be a crisis, or lead to a moment of feeling like you're in a crisis situation. A community crisis. I mean, these are things that we could talk about, like, I think about like Hurricane Katrina and stuff like that, where specific, like, like a weather condition, totally unexpected, out of nowhere, just sort of rips in and destroys a community and leads to instability in many facets. I mean, instability, not being able to have employment, not being able to have access to food or shelter or anything like that, potential injuries, death, those types of things. And then, I mean, really, we can jump into a societal crisis. I think there's a lot going on right now. A lot of examples that we can point to of societal crises that folks are experiencing. I mean, for one, the whole population is going through a pandemic, which is absolutely, a form of crisis for many folks. They're fearful of their health. They're fearful of access to just like food and daily supplies and all of that type of stuff. Unemployment is a huge thing that's happening. Fear of spreading disease to vulnerable, populations, stuff like that. That's something that we're currently going through that we can experience. What I like to point out when it comes to crisis is that a crisis for me is not necessarily a crisis for you, and that's really important to keep in mind when working with survivors in whatever capacity you're working with. There have definitely been incidents on hotline calls where, for me and my non-stressed out, my non-crisis mode way of thinking, that I'm like, that's the thing that got you? I mean, that's the thing that pushed you over the edge. And of course, I'm not saying that to these individuals, but thinking in my head, like, wow, I can't fathom how that got you to this point. But to them, again, it's that straw that broke the camel's back. It's something that just pushed them over the edge, potentially, to the point where they were just too overwhelmed to navigate the situation. I mean, we can talk, right? I mean, going back to just even like societal crises, or just like a major example that's happening in modern day world, I want to say USA, but it's a global thing, is the difference in responses for some folks who believe that this pandemic is a real thing, or folks who believe that this pandemic is a hoax, right? We've got a huge part of the population who, like I was saying earlier, they're freaking out. They're concerned about their health and safety and well-being, and like, what's the future going to look like? And how am I going to, maintain taking care of myself and my family and all of that? Like, I mean, really, like, is this going to last forever? How many lives are going to be lost? All of these types of things. When you've got another major part of the population who is like, what are you talking about? I had COVID and it felt like a minor cold to me. I don't know what all the hype is about. And to me, it feels like a hoax. It feels like, a fake news thing and all of that. And it's really interesting for everybody, again, in this sort of like global experience, to be going through the same moment. A crisis to many folks is not a crisis to other folks. For many other people, it seems like a complete overreaction and a waste of resources and time. So again, just keeping that in mind, that just because it doesn't seem incredibly overwhelming to you does not mean it's incredibly overwhelming, or does mean it's not incredibly overwhelming to the individual that you're working with. So we want to treat folks like with respect and understand how trauma works, and still get them access to supports in ways that that respects their lived experience, because their feelings, despite if you're not feeling them, their feelings are valid, and that's important to note. Okay, most of what we're dealing, and especially in the capacity of the hotline calls, what we're dealing with is going to be that personal crisis. I mean, the vast majority of the time, I'm getting one caller on a phone call. Sometimes I'll get like two siblings, or like a social worker and their client or something like that. But most of the time you're dealing with that sort of one-on-one communication. Really, with personal crisis, an individual can no longer cope with a situation. It's this is preceded by events of an extraordinary nature, triggering extreme tension and stress within an individual. So again, keep in mind, it doesn't have to be the most extreme incident to throw somebody into a crisis. It's just everything that they're experiencing, and then this little, this cherry on top, this traumatic cherry on top of what they're going through, that makes just this terrible experience for individuals. With this, with the crisis, it requires those major decisions or actions to resolve. It's not something that, like I said, you can't just keep running into that same brick wall and expect to get out of crisis mode. It's just not going to happen. You got to rear out. Crises can be triggered by a wide range of situations, kind of like I was just talking about a minute ago: extreme weather conditions, sudden change in employment, financial state, medical emergencies, long-term illness, and social or familial turmoil. There are a lot of things that can throw somebody into crisis mode. It's not just one area that we're dealing with. It's a lot. We want to keep in mind that it could be anything that puts people in crisis. Yeah, so what we want to do, hopefully, in any crisis intervention, but really on hotline calls in this conversation anyway, is get people out of crisis mode. I don't know if you've tried to work with anybody who is in just like full blown crisis. It's just really, really, really impossible to engage a lot of the time. You are speaking, you know, when they're in crisis mode, they're looking at this brick wall. You essentially are on the other side of the brick wall talking to the wall, and it's just, there's no communications going back and forth. What you're saying oftentimes does not resonate with the individual. They're just kind of stuck in this loop that we need to help mellow out and then reroute from. Overall goal of crisis intervention is to get the individual back to pre-crisis level of functioning or higher with the help of a social support group. Like I said, we can't, if we're just talking to this brick wall that they've thrown up, we're not going to be doing them really any justice. We're not going to be able to serve them to the best of our capacity. We need to be able to get people out of crisis mode thinking, you know, even if it's just for the duration of the conversation, even if it's just for the time being. We want to be able to, you know, lower the traumatic response, lower the overwhelmed capacity of their brain, their emotions, all that stuff, so we can actually, you know, plant useful information that they can hopefully pursue to get themselves out of whatever situations are throwing them into moments of crisis. So, and we'll jump more into all of these as the presentation goes on, but really ultimately what we're trying to do with the process of crisis intervention, we want to address the safety of the individuals first and foremost. We want to make some psychological contact with them, attend to their emotional distress, identify immediate needs that they're looking for, and then create a plan of action or a safety plan around everything that we've kind of discussed with the individual. Okay, so like I said, the first step is addressing their safety with any hotline. Let's just with any hotline, with any, you know, service that we're trying to help with, you know, like survivors of violence. Safety really should be one of our, you know, like if not our number one priority for the individual. I mean, I talk to people all the time. My goal on the hotline is to keep people as safe as possible in whatever situations they're choosing to be in. It might not be a situation that I agree with personally. It might not be a situation that I would choose for myself, but it is their choice, and I am here to empower them and keep them as safe as we can within the, you know, the life circumstance that they're wanting to stay in or exit, depending on what we're dealing with. Sometimes when it comes to folks who are calling the hotline, they are not in a safe place. That's just kind of the reality of what we're dealing with. We want to always ask the callers if they are in a safe place. We want to address that. I mean, just a simple question like, are you in a safe place to talk? Are you safe right now? I mean, it's a simple question. Get some yes or no's and figure out where to go from there, especially if there are warning signs that they might be calling while still in danger. Some examples here, you know, maybe strange or no response to your questions. If you're unfamiliar with the 2015 Super Bowl PSA at 911 pizza phone call, I know that somewhere in one of the playlists on our YouTube page, Andy has that PSA, but it's it's easy to find if you just Google, you know, 2015 pizza 911 PSA.
I'll link that in the emails that I send after the webinar. So yeah, yep, I'll link that for y'all.
Perfect, yeah. But what it goes through essentially is, I mean, you've got somebody who's calling dispatch and asking to order a pizza. Long story short, and I say long story short, it's like a 30-second PSA, but the dispatcher is finally able to catch on that though the woman calling in is ordering a pizza, she's actually in danger, and she's trying to speak in code to get police to respond to the situation that she's in. And so keeping that in mind, I mean, I haven't personally experienced anything like that on the hotline in the calls that I've taken, at least on the link line. But if they're being, you know, weird, if they're not responding directly, just keep that in mind, that there could be something, you know, fishy or dangerous happening in the moment. Talking very softly, that could be indicative of let's just say somebody hiding. They're maybe, or they're whispering because their partner is asleep in the next room, and it's midnight, and this is the only time that they had a chance to call to see what resources are available and stuff like that. I also like to talk to our advocates about talking very softly, being hoarse, whispering and stuff like that. Could be indicative of strangulation, which working in this field is a very, very, very high risk thing that you want to consider. If somebody mentions that they've been choked or strangled, we want to take that seriously, very, very seriously. So keep that in mind, that it could be something that they could be hiding or something like that, or it could be they experienced some physical trauma that resulted in the fact that they can no longer talk normally. Maybe some loud chaotic noise in the background. I mean, I will say, at least in my experience on the hotline, this is most of the time, this is not a huge situation that they're in that's immediately dangerous. Maybe they're outside at a public place, or like the wind is blowing into their phone or something like that, or you've got kids in the background because they're picking up their cans or whatever. Still checking in and making sure, like, is this a safe time to talk? Are you okay? Absolutely. But this could be a lot of things. I mean, it really could be just the environment they're in. Still though, touch base, because I have had calls where we've got the abusive partner, banging on the door that I'm hearing on the hotline call, and I'm asking the person, is it safe to talk? And fortunately in this case, they had already actually called 911 before contacting our hotline, but still, like, it's something to be aware of, and different things. I mean, like I said, if they're hiding in the bathroom, closet, under the bed, in their car, etc. I mean, I think the last time that I talked to anybody in a closet or anything like that, I was a teenager, like talking to my friends and stuff, like, so it's really not typical behavior for an adult to just be hiding and having a discussion with somebody on a crisis hotline. We might want to probably address that. So unsafe callers, and this is an area, I mean, folks, if you have any questions on this, please feel free to ask. This is an area with our advocates for the link line when I train them. I get a lot of questions around, so please ask if you have them. But yeah, if a caller expresses that they believe their personal safety is at immediate risk, then one of the following strategies should be employed. Okay, so obviously we want to ask the caller if they feel that law enforcement should be involved in order to protect their safety. Law enforcement, they're going to be the first responders with with coalition. We do not have the capacity to just go into a domestic violence situation and pick somebody up, or like stop it or anything like that. That's just not our role. If they need emergency assistance, first responders, we're gonna request that they call 911. If they answer yes in that they feel law enforcement should be involved, ask the caller if they would feel comfortable and are able to hang up and call 911. And this is the area that I get a lot of questions about. So for example, the VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, federal confidentiality requirements that we must adhere to as grantees or sub-grantees of that funding, we are unable to, in the capacity of a link line or anybody who receives VAWA funding, to reach out and make these three-way calls to law enforcement, because it would be a breach of confidentiality. Systems-based advocates who are not receiving that funding don't have the same confidentiality requirements as we might on the hotline. So in that situation, we are unable to make that three-way call to law enforcement. It's not something, it would be a breach of confidentiality. It could jeopardize funding. There's a lot that goes into it, and we do not want to do that. So we would have to request that the caller hangs up with us and calls 911 themselves. We can't do that for them. That being said, at least in the capacity of our hotline, we don't get a ton of callers, if any really, that are wanting to, that are thinking that we're first responders. I think that most people have the the recognition that if I'm in an emergency situation, I want to call 911, not this obscure 1-800 number. But yeah, I like to train folks on that. You know, if they answer no, but they still feel that they are unsafe in the situation, that's when we're going to go into that sort of immediate safety planning mode with them, and figure out how do we keep them as safe as possible in this moment. If they don't want to call the police, they don't want to get them involved, but they still need assistance, how can we do that? You know, can we ask if they leave where they are safely? Can they, you know, go to a neighbor's house? Can they, I think so many people in like heated moments, and I talk to folks on the hotline who experience this, they don't even think like, oh my gosh, I can leave my house. Like I can leave the apartment. I can do that. So plugging that as an idea could be an option. Can they call a friend or family member to come help? Is that something? If they don't have transportation services themselves, if they don't have a car, can you get a hold of somebody who does have a car who can get you out of the situation safely? You know, would they feel comfortable going to their neighbors? Maybe not. Maybe, you know, the abusive partner is best friends with the neighbors. But oftentimes I like to talk to people about like this sort of community watch aspect, maybe, of letting your neighbors know if you feel it's safe to do so, you know, what you're going through and all of that. So they can, you know, like they can take the kids over if they need to, while, you know, police get involved, or, you know, whatever the situation is. So recognizing neighbors is maybe an option. You know, are they willing to three-way call with you and a victim service provider? So with this, so when I say victim service provider, I mean a community-based victim service provider who receives the VAWA funding and has the same confidentiality requirements as us. So in this case, I could, if we're in the Salt Lake County area and somebody is needing services, and they want to get connected with a victim service provider, with permission from the caller, I would be able to make a three-way call to like the YWCA downtown or South Valley Sanctuary in West Jordan. I could do that because of this, like I said, we're on the same requirements for confidentiality, which makes it so we're able to make that communication and pass folks over to their services. With that, again, because I know, like I said, I get a lot of questions on this. Does anybody have any questions around this?
Hey, Sam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, someone did have a question. Are we able to ask the caller for consent to call 911 for them if they say they are not able to?
Right. As far as our interpretation at the UDVC, the answer is still no. Again, we just can't do that through what our requirements are. And I will say, mandatory reporting still exists. So if you're dealing with a situation in which somebody discloses enough identifying information about themselves and somebody who is of a vulnerable population, so if they are a child or they are a vulnerable adult, meaning they are over the age of 65, or they are an adult with a disability, mandatory reporting requirements in Utah supersede the VAWA confidentiality requirements. So at that point in time, as a hotline advocate, we would have to make an additional phone call after the fact, after we got off the hotline call, with like child protective services or adult protective services or something like that to make a report. However, when it comes to the link line, we do not gather, we gather very, very little demographic information about callers. We do not get their phone numbers. It is the nature of the hotline to be anonymous. We are really trying to maintain confidentiality because we know that confidentiality could equal safety. So we don't get that, but if mandatory reporting were triggered, we would have to do that, yes. But yeah, we can't get the permission from the caller. Like I said, based on our interpretation of the VAWA federal requirements, because it's two different systems, and it would be us still technically breaching confidentiality. The language around VAWA stuff is you have to get reasonable, time-limited consent, written consent of the individual to make those calls to law enforcement. So like in shelter capacities, the survivor might be able to sign like a release of information agreement with like a law enforcement agency and the shelter. So like ex-detective could contact them, but we do not have that capacity on an anonymous hotline to do that.
Great, thank you for that, Sam. We did have another question on what are your thoughts on current movement to defund the police? And I think I want to talk a little bit about that for a second. So I think it's really important for folks to understand that when you see articles and headlines that say defund the police doesn't necessarily mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean get rid of the police entirely, no one will have police and we just all run around in anarchy. That's not at all what it means. So a part of defunding police means defunding and breaking down parts of law enforcement that have historically hurt the people that are within communities, especially Black and brown bodies, queer, trans folks, folks living with disabilities, stuff like that. So I can send you some more information on that after the webinar. This is a really good question, and it is a question that requires a lot more conversation around it. Is there anything that you would like to add to that, Sam?
Sure. I mean, I definitely don't want to be, the official, person to make a stance on for the UDVC on defunding police or anything like that. That's just not my role. I can say that, as UDVC is an anti-violence organization, and we want to, in whatever capacity that means, adhere to the standards throughout society for all members of society of maintaining anti-violence practices. So yeah, I don't know all the nuances of what that could look like and UDVC's any official statements or anything like that. But yeah, we're anti-violence and we want to make sure that all folks are safe, regardless of any being a part of any sort of or marginalized population.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, I will follow up and I will send some resources on that, especially some more explanations on what it means to actually defund and kind of what the current current movement is talking about. Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. And really, I mean, this is an area, like I said, I get a lot of questions on. If you have follow-up questions, anything like that, feel free to, plug it in the chat, whatever. Follow up with me later on, that's fine. But yeah, just maintain safety while still adhering to our confidentiality requirements is kind of what we're talking about with this. Okay. So the second step here that we want to do once we've addressed somebody's safety is we want to make some psychological contact with them, and we want to connect with them on that deeper psychological level. We want to attempt to establish a rapport that is just genuine, caring, accepting, non-judgmental, empathetic. And I would think, honestly, if you're on this webinar, if you're in this field, if you're doing this work, you're probably, you probably hold these attributes pretty dearly. I know I do. I know Andy does. I mean, it's something that's very important to us. I will say, though, when you're on a hotline call and all you have is verbal communication, somebody can't see your, your body language, anything like that. It's really important to check how you sound. That's something that I know I had to do. I really had to work on when I first started getting into this work in making my voice sound maybe less harsh. When I'm on a hotline call, I really try my best to speak slower because I know in my day-to-day life I sound like an auctioneer sometimes. I know that I can sound, blunt sometimes, unintentionally, and I really had to work on that. I wanted to make sure that folks knew that I was somebody that could be trusted. So I had to work on, softening my voice and slowing down and rephrasing things. For example, I mean, you could say, what do you want versus how can I help you? Essentially, you're asking the same things, but one of them sounds a whole heck of a lot nicer than the other one. So really strategically choosing how you phrase things and what the unintentional connotations of what you're saying could mean is important. I mean, really, it helps the advocate seem credible, which will help gain the caller's trust. That's what we're wanting to do. We have a small amount of time, especially for people in crisis mode, to be like, look, I'm somebody you can trust. Let me get you help. That's ultimately what I want to do, right? Okay, so with step 3, we want to attend to the caller's emotional distress. I mean, once we've shown that, like, hey, are you safe? We want to keep you safe. I want you to trust me. We want to focus on their emotional distress. I mean, some callers on the link line or hotline can be highly emotional. It's a given. I mean, it's something that people have dealt with and are dealing with, like, absolutely like terrible circumstances, the heartbreaking circumstances. I would expect nothing less than for people to, like, feel what they're going through in an emotional way, and express that, especially on a hotline call when we're maybe diving into some of the nitty-gritty details of stuff they've experienced. Emotional distress is a symptom of crisis and trauma. Some examples that really come up on the hotline, and these are really kind of the main areas. Crying, we get plenty of people who are crying on the hotline. It's kind of a given. Yelling, this is some area, and this is an area that I talk to with yelling and anger particularly. I like to talk to our advocates about, like, really keep in mind that this is a traumatic response. The vast majority of the time it's a traumatic response, and the person isn't intentionally targeting you. I mean, I have people on the hotline who will just be swearing up a storm, and, you know, like 10 minutes later or something, they apologize and they're like, sorry, this isn't about you. I mean, I get, like, feel what you need to feel. Like, I'm not going to take that personally, because it's not about me. They've dealt with some terrible things, and, like, process that, feel that, get it out. This is maybe the only time that they've had somebody to listen to them. So just keep that in mind. Like, try not to take any offense to that. And we'll talk later about maybe, like, abusive callers and stuff like that. But if people are just expressing emotion, let them express emotion. It's difficult what they're going through, and I'd feel as angry and hurt too if I went through that, right? Some people calling in might be detached. I mean, it's not, people are, again, dealing with incredibly traumatic things, horrible things that they've experienced. Detaching might be the only way that they're able to, like, say or express some of the things that they're going through, and just completely kind of getting that, like going emotionally AWOL almost, for moments when they're expressing things. That they are saying all the stuff, but it just feels like this almost like hollow conversation sometimes. That happens. Again, like, I don't know, like, anything, like, I'll be like, if I were to talk about, like, the worst, most, like, embarrassing, hurtful experiences of my life, I can easily see myself detaching from that conversation just to be able to explain it to, like, a therapist or whatever, to just get it out, right? And laughing certainly comes up, and it's not like, haha, this is so funny. It's just like, most of the time I get, like, this, like, oh my god, like, this is my life, this, like, almost like ironic laughing, this as a coping mechanism maybe, that people are just kind of dealing maybe sometimes with, like, this is, like, I can't believe this is my life. Like, I can't believe this is what I'm going through, as a defense mechanism maybe. I know, like, you know, when you hit your funny bone or whatever, and you laugh, or at least I do anyway. I'm not laughing because I think, oh my gosh, you know, this feels so tickly and fun. I'm laughing because I don't want to cry, right? And that's something that absolutely can be translated onto a hotline call where people are detailing abusive experiences they've had to go through.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I talk? I think you spoke about denial a little bit earlier, and I think denial even plays into this situation right here. Is when we're having these conversations with folks who are going through crisis, maybe when we bring up things or are talking about things that they may, denial may come up, saying like, oh no, this isn't, they aren't like that, this is just da-da-da, or something. And that can be totally normal and totally common, right? And even like the example that you gave about COVID, folks who are maybe denying or in denial or, saying that it's a hoax and stuff, like, think about the position that they're in, that I have just been told, I have just found out that there is an intense danger that is surrounding me, could be surrounding me, that I can't see, that I don't know how to maybe prevent or get away from. I maybe don't know how to protect my family and my friends and my loved ones, or that I'm at risk, or my family, friends, and loved ones are at risk. And that is scary. So the way that I'm going to respond is deny that, because thinking about it or trying to address it is too much, right? And yeah, I think that's something that I've experienced when working with folks calling in crisis. And yeah, very, very interesting. So just wanted to add that. Thanks, Sam.
No, that's an excellent point, and thank you for bringing it up, because yeah, I mean, it's something that, yeah, if it's too overwhelming for folks, they might absolutely default to some denial responses to maintain or get through what they're going through. Yeah, so jumping into this too, I mean, we want to allow that catharsis to occur, right? Like, I mean, we want to let people process what they're feeling. In a healthy, relevant way. I know that some people can get very cyclical on hotline calls and just start repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And of course, that's not what we want to do, because it doesn't seem like it's necessarily productive for the caller or, you know, the advocate taking the call anymore. But we do want to give an opportunity for folks to really feel what they're going through, to express what they're going through. Because like I was saying, this might be the first time in like 8 years that they've had anybody to talk to about this, right? There's going to be a lot of stuff to unpack. There's going to be a lot of emotions potentially around that. And of course, you're not going to get through that on a hotline call, like one individual hotline, anonymous call, but still, like, opening that door and allowing somebody to feel safe in expression is so crucial. And through that, I get on soapboxes about validation. I did not understand the power of validating somebody until working on a crisis hotline. Like, very truly, and it's something that I know that like advocates, when I train them, they kind of giggle at when I'm like, in validation, you know, every other 10 minutes or something. But like, really truly validate people. It is like the easiest way to get, for me, somebody who's in crisis mode, to de-escalate, is to just believe what they're feeling and be like, that is valid. That is so valid. I can see myself experiencing that too if I went through that. Like, I mean, just really like being there with them and letting them feel that and letting them know that they're not full of it. I mean, so many people calling the hotline are like, I feel crazy for feeling this, for thinking this, for doing this. And it's like, you're not crazy. You're reacting very normally to an abnormal situation. Absolutely, what you're going through is a valid experience, and you have the right to feel those feelings. Like, really, like, please, if you take away anything from all of this, like, validate people. Please validate people. You know, allowing callers to vent feelings and thoughts may be the most therapeutic thing that you can do on the hotline. You need to have that, you know, safe and accepting environment, that genuine environment, that non-judgmental environment, all that stuff. But really, in doing so, you are saying that you accept the caller's feelings and thoughts, and that is incredibly encouraging to them to want to reach out to services. I mean, again, like, we're on a hotline. I'm on a crisis hotline. The link line is not set up to offer every service available, you know, at a community domestic violence service provider. What I want to do is help them feel safe enough to reach out, to be like, oh my gosh, maybe there are more people like you out there who can help me, and I want to access them in a real tangible way. So please, 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 please validate people, like, more than anything. It's so beneficial, and it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna make your job on the hotline so much easier if you can validate what they're going through successfully and let them understand that you are genuinely empathetic about what they're going through. All right, so we got this here. Let's see. I don't know if it's going to load. And I mean, like, Andy, do you want me to go find this on the YouTube page, or are we too stressed about that? I mean, this is a Brene Brown video on empathy versus sympathy. I don't know that it's popping up on my end. Maybe. Oh, that's got a glimmer of hope there.
If not, I can also send the link.
Yeah, just for the sake of time, we'll just send the link. That's fine.
Okay.
It's a short video, but it really is, like, it really hones in on empathy versus sympathy and why we want to have an empathetic response. I mean, empathy is feeling with people. We don't want to. I don't know how many times on hotline calls, and I mean, like, hopefully most of the time on hotline calls, I feel like I've been successful in offering like a community resource or something like that for folks to reach out to. But sometimes I just don't have an answer. Like, there's just a resource maybe just doesn't exist, or I am, you know, ignorant about a system.
or something like that, that I'm unable to offer the information that somebody's maybe hoping to access. But if I'm being empathetic and I'm being caring with them, and I'm trying to help, as best as I can, and feeling with them, I've had plenty of callers that have said, thank you just for listening to me. Like, that's probably the most important thing that you could have done right now. Just try as much as you can, please, to be empathetic with folks and sound like you care. I mean, really think about your tone of voice. I know that this is something we talk about, or I talk to, and when it comes to tone of voice, at least, I'm someone who had to regulate it, but I talk to our male advocates too, to think about like softening tone and stuff like that, maybe not sounding as harsh, so it doesn't potentially like trigger folks. But really, like, yeah, just having that softer approach is beneficial. Okay, so some things that folks might be experiencing or might be doing are going through some series of coping mechanisms. People in crisis, people in trauma, people in danger might default to various coping mechanisms to help temporarily alleviate stress caused by the crisis. And so some things that to talk about here that people have expressed on Hotline anyway: making rash decisions. This could be like, they keep showing up at my house, they keep threatening me, so I'm gonna go buy a gun. Like, never having used a gun before, never having handled a gun, I'm gonna go buy a gun. UDVC is not an anti-gun organization. We're a very pro-gun safety organization. So I like to talk to people about, let's talk about that. Like, is it, do you feel it's really safe for you to introduce a gun in the situation? And it's their right to choose, but I like to try to educate folks about, if you're untrained, maybe that's not the best thing to bring into a domestic violence situation, because of the risk of lethality and the possibility of the gun being flipped on the individual who is being abused is very high. Quitting your job and trying to move to a different state could be a rash decision. Pulling your kids out of school, whatever, things like that could be, in the moment you're freaking out, you don't know what to do, so you do something big and hoping that it'll make an outstanding change to their situation. Some high emotions people might be experiencing, like going back into that like crying, the anger, that low affect, that the detachment, all those things that people might be going through to cope with their experiences. Various defense mechanisms. Andy brilliantly touched on denial just a bit ago. Repressing, not talking about, just like pushing all of everything down into your psyche. So so it's just like sitting there waiting to burst out and overwhelm you potentially, or continue further harm emotionally, psychologically. Avoiding things, not wanting to have conversations, do things, do tasks. So that falls into like putting things on hold too, but avoiding situations altogether, avoiding people, avoiding confrontations, avoiding whatever, right? Acting out, and we talk about acting out and it sounds very like high school, teenage rebellion, right? But it's kind of the same concept. I had a caller one time whose sister, was a sister calling in about her sister that was experiencing abuse. So she was in this terribly abusive marriage. Throughout the entirety of the marriage, it sounds like the sister, the survivor, was like this grade A mom, right? Like always there for her kids, always like super soccer mom, like all that stuff. Really, really involved in the child's, the children's well-being, despite what she was going through with her spouse. And once the everything kind of came crashing down and they ended up going the divorce route, all of that, it sounds like from what the sister was explaining, that the survivors just started acting out. She was very detached from the children. She was getting maybe more aggressive with conversations with like family and friends. She was, going to, bars, which was atypical of her, and like partying late night, and again, leaving the kids with family and stuff, like things that were very abnormal for her, acting out and trying to find some way to cope, right? That just because she was what she was going through. She was in crisis mode, and she was trying to figure out a way to minimize the hurt that she was feeling. Putting things on hold is a big thing. I mean, this could be like putting the divorce on hold. It could be getting a protective order on hold. It could be getting your kids to school on hold, putting basic hygiene on hold. Those types of eating on hold, all that stuff. I mean, really just putting things on hold, not accessing typical daily activities or things that you need to do, applying for that job, moving out of state, applying to college, whatever, just like not doing the things that you would set out to do or you would typically do. Could be a form of a coping mechanism. And then some high risk behaviors, substance use. One thing that I've learned, just when I was going through the social work program, or in anything, I mean, if you're trying to numb some emotions, drugs and alcohol are kind of like the most unhealthy, but like a really good way to numb things. We don't want to do that, but it's absolutely a coping mechanism for folks because they're overwhelmed, they don't know what to do, and they just want to shut down, right? Risky sex. This is, having many partners that maybe you don't know, you just barely met, not using protection, things like that, that could lead to potentially dangerous situations. Self-harm. I mean, this is something that we're talking about, whether it be through, like the physical self-harm with, like cutting and stuff like that, or eating disorders, those types of things that really could, again, be a coping mechanism for individuals who are trying to, control their life in one way or another, and they don't know how to do it. I know that like in the I took a social problems class, and one of the things that the professor was saying was when it came to eating disorders, for many folks, in child abuse situations anyway, is that people didn't necessarily, the children didn't know how to cope with the abuse they're experiencing in their home life, right? But one thing that they could control was what they were putting into their body, what they're eating, right? And so it turned into, as a coping mechanism, turned into an eating disorder, but due to the trauma and the abuse they're experiencing in their home life, right? And that can translate into domestic violence, adult relationships. With hotline calls, what we want to do, identifying some immediate needs here through forms of active listening. We want to provide feedback with the callers. This is something that's important, and not just these, these sure, yeah responses. Actually trying to have an engaged conversation with the individual. Of course, not dominating the conversation. We're there for the caller, and we just want to, answer the questions and maybe get, further more information, stuff like that. But providing some feedback, insights, plugging questions that helps stimulate thinking on their end so they can make more educated decisions about what they want to do. Removing distractions. This is something that's super important. I know that like with UDVC, we don't have like a call center. All of our advocates work remotely. And so from that, we need to really keep in mind, for me, like especially in like this COVID, I'm working from home. So I know that when I'm on a hotline call, I can't be, or taking calls, I can't be around my dog. As much as I love her, little precious baby angel of mine, she likes to bark. And I can't have that as a distraction in the room when I'm helping somebody. It's just, I can't do that. Not having the TV on, not having anything like that, really being in an appropriate space to help somebody so I can focus my attention on them. We want to avoid interrupting. This is easier said than done, especially on a hotline call, because you only have that verbal communication. So sometimes you're not able to see, through body language if somebody's done with a thought or topic or something. If you do start talking at the same time, let the other person talk. I mean, just default, no, okay. I mean, you go, that's fine. We can, as advocates, we can hold our thoughts for a minute, make a note of what we were going to say, whatever we're doing, and circle back to it later after the person had finished expressing what they were trying to express or communicate to us. We want to pay attention to details. There's a lot of stuff that, if we're just paying attention to the level of like, how bad someone's like freaking out on a hotline call, we're maybe missing important details. For example, going back to like choking and strangulation, I have a lot of people on the hotline really like to just gloss over that fact. They're like, oh yeah, you know, like they've never really been physical. Well, I mean, they did choke me a couple of times last week, but nothing beyond that. And it's like, okay, if I'm just paying attention to the fact that they're not alarmed about something, I'm missing the whole point that this person has endured multiple acts of strangulation by their partner, which is a huge risk to potential lethality that I want to be paying attention to. So just keeping that in mind. Some other red flags that I like to talk to folks about, if the person's being stalked, is a huge thing. A lot of people love to minimize stalking, especially in this like day and age of technology and immediate access to information and stuff like that. Stalking behavior is incredibly scary and could lead to potential lethality. I also like to talk about or pay attention to if somebody is mentioning that the person is an ex-partner or an estranged spouse or something like that, because we know that 75% of homicides occur after the victim has left the abusive relationship, right? So paying attention again, keeping in mind some key red flags, knowing some statistics, things like that could be of benefit to you to be able to alert the caller to things that they're maybe overlooking as something incredibly severe and dangerous. And also providing that verbal confirmation that you're still listening. That's something that I had to work on the hotline when I first started taking calls. I would get into this mode of I'm looking up information and I go quiet because I'm trying to focus on the folders or whatever. And somebody will think like that I hung up on them asking, are you still there? Are you still listening? I just like to, as the conversation goes on, let them know where I'm at. It's just taking a second to load and okay, I'm opening up this folder now or whatever. And just keeping them engaged with the conversation so they know that I'm actively trying to assist them. Okay, so some of the immediate needs that folks might express on the hotline, and this is not a comprehensive list, this is just some things that do come up on our hotline anyway. That the caller feels that entering a shelter is the best plan for maintaining their immediate safety. Okay, perfect. For you know, asking what county they're in so we can get them access potentially to the closest places. Talking about you know, making sure that an individual has shelter, like the shelter has space for them within their organization so they don't just leave. Find out that nobody has a bed for them and be stuck between homelessness and going back to their abusive partner that they very well could have just been made very angry by leaving. Big things to consider, right? The caller is interested in working with an advocate to further plan for safety and future action. Fabulous. Let's get you connected with like a case manager or, you know, an advocate within, you know, domestic violence service provider. Or if this is somebody who's wanting to work with an advocate through like a systems-based process because they're dealing with being the victim of like a domestic violence crime or something like that. Absolutely, let's get you connected to a systems-based advocate that can help you with the prosecutorial process and stuff like that. The caller wants to file a protective order. Okay, cool. Establishing some things, making sure that they're or making sure, alerting them they need to be like the legal definition of a cohabitant, and they need to meet the legal definition of what abuse and domestic violence is, because it differs from what us as hotline advocates are able to interpret. For the legal aspect, you have to prove that you're in the physical harm has occurred or that you're in immediate danger of physical harm. I can't remember what the exact language is. It's something that's me paraphrasing, but the physical harm is a really big aspect that you have to play on with the protective orders. Emotional, psychological, financial abuse, though it is abuse, that is something that we are aware of the dangers of and know that it's harmful and traumatic to people, very, very often are not enough to get a protective order with just that alone, right? So establishing where they can go to get protective orders, if they can get the forms online, if they want to work with a victim advocate, what places they can go to do that, all those sorts of things. The caller cannot get their abusive partner to leave their house. I mean, there's a lot that's going into that. Is whose name is on the lease? Is this something that, of course, you know, like a protective order is not an eviction notice. That is a totally separate thing. But, you know, like if you get a protective order against one residence and you're both living in that residence, the survivor and the abusive partner, no, it's not an eviction notice, but that is a protected residence for the survivor. so the abusive partner can't be there anymore. So just things to consider along those roads. And again, like keeping in mind that the protective orders, they are not eviction notices. That's a whole separate thing that somebody might have to go through civil court. Let's see, the caller needs assistance with leaving their current location in order to have access to a social support network. Depending on where the person is located, what agencies they have access to. You know, the service providers might be able to use their resources to like order a cab or request a lift or something, or get bus tokens, or something like that, that could be of assistance. So getting them connected back to the local service providers, domestic violence service providers, oftentimes, to see what resources are available to them. Or then the caller is being, maybe potentially stalked by an abusive partner. Things to keep in mind. I mean, keeping a stalking log is a huge thing. Even if it seems like small incidents, we want to, with a stalking log, hopefully be painting, a pattern of behavior. That this person showed up at this time. No, I didn't get video evidence of it, but it happened. And also it's been happening for the last 4 nights. And so, I mean, it's going to help if they go to court to get, protective orders or stalking injunctions and stuff like that, to help, again, paint that pattern of behavior. Also talking about what are other ways that one can document acts of stalking, whether it be through, like video surveillance or pictures, or screen recordings of, text message conversations, or, phone logs to show how many times somebody's called or tried to text somebody, or, screenshots of social media accounts, emails, things like that, saving emails. There's a lot that can go into it. So really just talking about like ways to document how somebody is contacting them, witness statements, all of that stuff. Police reports can help, all of that stuff. Okay, with all of that, we've gone through all this stuff. What we now want to do, once we've gotten people to hopefully a more stable place, is to create a plan of action or a safety plan around what we just talked about. So after we've identified the immediate needs and what the person is wanting to get help with, we can assist the caller as they formulate their plan of action. And again, it's them formulating it. We can suggest things. We want to offer options to people. That's a part of empowerment, and giving them a choice, but it's not something that we want to dictate what they do. It's entirely up to them. A plan of action consists of short-term goals identified by the caller as the next steps they would like to take in addressing the crisis. This isn't necessarily something that's like, what do we want to do in 3 years from now? More it's like, okay, so after we get off the phone call, what are your next steps that you want to do? What for like the next day or week or whatever? What actions are you able to potentially take that you want to take that can help get you to as safe as possible of a situation that you want to be in. A good plan of action also includes utilization of the caller as a social support system. So with that, and just jumping into what a social support system can look like, I mean, in a perfect world, you have the individual, and then you've got hopefully closer family and friends. For folks, sometimes that's not an option, so we might have to get a little more creative, of course, but not overlooking that as something that people. Well, I know I'll have people calling in the hotline and be like, I need to get out of the situation. I need to get into shelter. Oh my gosh, this is so terrible. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about this. Do you have any family and friends in the area? And then the caller, because they're so overwhelmed with what they're going through, just forgot that their sister had invited them to stay, 2 weeks ago in the next county over, and they actually feel that would be the safest option for them. So just not assuming that people always take this into consideration, and just touching on this just in case, because you never know if that's something that they've actually fully considered before wanting to take more grand steps. Accessing community supports, and this is community like service providers and stuff, of course, but thinking about what other community supports could be too. Oftentimes people have a very close relationship with with whatever religious group they're a part of. That could be something to maybe they might feel safe accessing. I mean, I know that the first call I ever took was from a bishop trying to help a woman in his ward who had approached him about some family violence she was experiencing from her adult son. So, I mean, it's something to consider as an option for folks, and other community supports that people might be a part of that they're maybe overlooking. And also to like jumping into coworkers, I really do think that coworkers are an underutilized resource for folks. If you're familiar with, or if you listen to the Cold podcast with about Susan and Josh Powell and all of that, you'll remember that in the beginning episodes of the podcast, Susan had reached out to her coworkers with vital pieces of information, stuff like that, that she wanted left with her coworkers, and said, you know, if anything happens to me, get this to the police. Like, don't let Josh touch this. Don't let him have access to this. I want this to go directly to the police. Callers might have, or coworkers might have like access to technology that's not being monitored. So they can use like phones or laptops or something to look up information. It might be a lot less accessible for the abusive partner or person to infiltrate. So it's just, yeah, just keeping in mind that there could be a variety of people that people are interacting with, survivors are interacting with, that could be of benefit. And ultimately what we're trying to do is refer people to helping agencies. I mean, especially on the link line, we want to get people connected to we're linking people to services. So we want to provide the appropriate referrals to victim service providers to ensure survivors have access to ongoing advocacy, shelter for services, and further crisis intervention. Because as a hotline advocate, I can only do so much. I don't have those tangible resources for folks, so I want to get them connected to those. And of course, if they need, always encourage them to call back to our hotline if they so wish, or if anything comes up in the future. Some common errors or fallacies that I like to talk to our advocates about. You know, it is your caller, so only you can handle the call, right? Absolutely not. I mean, I strongly encourage our advocates, if they need to, if they're feeling overwhelmed, if they can't find a resource or something, to reach out, look it up. You know, text me if you need to. Like, I mean, I'm happy to help, try to reach out to somebody or find an answer or something if you're not coming across something. Please, I mean, I'm not, and I would hope with anybody helping survivors, not being territorial, not being anything like that. I mean, our ultimate job is to help people in need, and I want to have as much communication with folks as needed to be able to do that. I'm not above asking questions to folks and reaching out, even as the person who oversees the hotline. I will absolutely, if I'm thrown by a question, I'm certainly going to text the rest of my team to see, like, or call them, or what, you know, whatever, like, what would you do? Like, what do I do? I don't have an answer. Do you have an idea? So yeah, keeping that in mind. You are expected to know everything. You are not an omnipotent problem solver. You are not an instant expert. You want to keep folks' expectations realistic, especially when it comes to, this is an area that I see on the hotline for legal questions. I know we do go over laws and legal issues in our trainings and stuff, and I have a decent idea of some understandings of like statutes and things. I am not a legal expert, and I'm very clear to make that a point on a hotline call, that I'm not a legal expert. I can't give you any information specifically about this. I can't say if the law applies to you. I can tell you what the statute says, but I can't tell you if that applies to your situation. You'll have to reach out to like an attorney or somebody to do that. So yeah, just keeping that in mind, keeping folks' expectations realistic, keeping your expectations realistic. You're not expected to come up with a solution that doesn't exist. And I know it's hard sometimes when callers are pushing for that on a hotline call, but if it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. Like, and it's difficult. We want to try to find a workaround, but we can't just fabricate things and have all the knowledge in the world, right? If I talk about something serious, it will cause them to react negatively. This is something that comes up. Our advocates have expressed concerns in the past about, what if I talk about suicide, right? Is this going to cause somebody to try to kill themselves? No, that is a choice that an individual makes. Of course, we want to, you know, be cognizant of that and aware and not induce any harm or anything like that. But talking about it will not make it happen, right? And oftentimes with these difficult conversations, if we're talking about suicide, we're talking about, you know, lethality, we're talking about these things that people have maybe never addressed before, that in and of itself could be life-saving. It could be a way to finally have this conversation that can get them access to real supports, that can help avoid any situation like that altogether, right? So just keeping that in mind, we might be in a position where we have to have difficult conversations with people, but those difficult conversations could very well be life-saving. And that's what I love about a lot of the hotline work that I do, is that I'm in a position to potentially help save someone's life, which is really, really incredible. And also too, going, as I mentioned earlier with abusive callers, you are expected to help the caller no matter what they do or say. Absolutely not. It's something, keep in mind the difference between somebody being abusive and someone having a traumatic response to their life experience. People are going to be upset. People are going to be angry. People are going to be crying. People are going to be swearing. That happens. That's okay. If you've been, beaten and abused for years, heck yeah, feel that. Like, I'm not going to take that away from you. But where we draw the line is when it becomes personal attacks or abusive behavior to the advocate. If you've got somebody who is particularly berating you, calling you, this, that, and the other, degrading you, whatever you're doing, you have the right to exit that call. I'm not like, of course, I guess if you need to have this discussion within your agency, as needed, and if there are different protocols, by all means, follow what you need to follow. But from the UDVC's perspective, absolutely not. We do not expect you to be subjected to abuse because you're trying to help somebody who's being abused. That is not something that we want to do. It's, self-care matters. We want to keep our advocates safe. And yeah, I encourage folks to let me know if that ever happens, but yeah, just keeping in mind, you do not need to withstand any verbal abuse for the sake of the caller. And this is also too with folks who are, like an incident that's come up recently on our hotline is we've had a series of calls that have been potentially very explicitly sexually graphic, to the point where it was getting abusive and the caller themselves were potentially misusing the hotline. With those situations, if it's getting too graphic, too much, all that stuff, it's okay to remind the caller potentially that this is inappropriate, or this is something to be discussed with a therapist. Let's get you connected to a therapist, or let's make this plan to contact your therapist or something like that. But this is not what this hotline is set up for. And if it continues on abusive or inappropriate dialogue, our advocates, we teach our advocates, they have the right to disconnect. You do not need to be subjected to abuse yourself just because you're helping on an abuse hotline, right? So yeah, that's kind of the end for my stuff. I know there was a little bit of time. Andy, you want to jump back in, or if anybody has any questions on anything, no, I'm happy to answer them. We've got a couple more minutes now that we've got the resources here.
Thanks, Sam. That was great.
Yeah.
A lot of really great information that you share and always share. I absolutely appreciate you doing these. If anyone does have any questions, definitely chime in. So we are at our resources portion of the webinar. All right, so we have today's game, and yes, it is a special edition because we have Sam here. So just like every week, we're going to, in that chat box, we're going to type what we think this picture is of. Do we think that this picture is a picture of Sam's dog? Do we think that this is a picture of a wild boar, right? It was, some folks are already chiming in with raccoon. They're like, I don't know if I trust you, friend. You've been
absolutely totally valid to not trust that this wouldn't be a raccoon.
Yeah, so some folks saying raccoon, dog, wild boar. I have no idea. Wild boar. JK, yeah, it's got to be a raccoon, Sam's dog. Oh gosh, looks like I've maybe thrown y'all a little bit of a loop for these past couple weeks, and now you're like, someone said dog, someone said Sasquatch an option, your cats, wild boar, I guess a dog. Oh my gosh, Sam's dog. Okay, so it looks like we have like 50%, we'll say like 40% dog, 40% wild boar.
A couple raccoons, all right.
10% cool. Raccoons, 10% or 9% my cats, and 1% Sasquatch. So, right. Sam, will you do the honors?
Absolutely. It is, yep, my dog. Not a raccoon, not a Sasquatch. Sometimes acts like a cat. Has never been ravenous like a wild boar. Just a little Rubik's Cube barking at the wind right now. Yeah.
Nice. All right, so let's ask our question for the week. How are y'all practicing self-care? How are y'all practicing self-compassion? How have you been taking care of yourself this week? What have you been doing? I've been watching a lot of Star Trek. Reading. Okay. What have you been doing, Sam? How have you been taking care of yourself?
Oh, I'm afraid to answer it on this hotline call with you, or this webinar with you. I don't want to trigger. Actually, though, I mean, I will say that, you know, getting out to the mountainous region this weekend was pretty legit. Getting out of my little basement that I've been stuck in most of the time during this whole COVID quarantine business. Yeah, I mean, playing some again, Dungeons and Dragons has been fun. Having that sort of ability to have control of a universe has been pretty sweet right now.
Yeah, that's valid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to say it. So some folks are saying exercise, love it. Setting more realistic and healthier goals, here for it. Walking, watering our garden. Hey, I've been good about watering my little plants out there. Took my mom for a pedicure for her birthday, nice. Exercising more, revisiting music I haven't listened to since 2008, nice. If you would like to, you know, let us know what music that is from 2008. Too much Diet Coke, yeah. You must live in Utah. Ooh, coloring is great. On my coffee table, I always have coloring books and crayons and colored pencils. So when folks, you know, when people did come over, that they could color and, you know, do that. So that's great. It sounds like y'all are really, you know, taking steps to take care of yourself. And I'm seeing a lot of different answers and from folks that have chimed in the past couple weeks. All right, so let's go over resources. Sam, do you want to help us talk about resources?
Yeah, sure. So with domestic violence victim services, if you're unfamiliar, within Utah, you know, 24/7, 15 in the state, it's a safe place for victims and their children. The various services they provide. I mean, I like to talk to folks about they're really pretty comprehensive resources for a lot of stuff. And it's because they are all independently ran, at least in the state of Utah. Each individual service provider might have, you know, grants or funding opportunities or resources available that, you know, another one doesn't. So I really would just like to get them connected with the service providers, because they can help with a ton of stuff, even stuff that I, you know, am unfamiliar with at the UDVC, because I don't pay attention to what goes on at every DVSP. So yeah, we've got our victim service providers here that can help anything from emergency shelter to, you know, personal care items, support groups, all that stuff, and are still accessible, at least to the vast majority of accessibility during this COVID time. So yeah, with teen dating violence resources, we've got Love is Respect. It is a branch of the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Super great resource, meant to target younger folks who have concerns about their dating relationships. They do have a text line, because we all know young folks love to text, and they do have a chat line on their website. If you just go to loveisrespect.org, or you can always call. I mean, as the link line advocate, I'm partial to people calling. So yeah, I think it's a great resource for folks, and a lot of people who are maybe doing trainings in the community for younger folks. There's a lot of great resources on their website, different like modules, things like that you can work through to help younger folks understand health relationships in a more digestible way for their age group. And Andy, do you want to explain Futures Without Violence on this one?
Yeah, Futures Without Violence is an excellent resource, excellent organization. They have a number of resources online, a lot of really good information online. You can order their pamphlets. They have really nice, easy to read small pamphlets and information about intimate partner violence that you can give out. There's a lot of places that have them in their bathrooms, waiting rooms, stuff like that. So super great. And they do have really, really nice webinars. So they'll cover topics in depth. They have national experts and leaders in topics of, you know, violence against women, intimate partner violence. I couldn't suggest them anymore. Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, and actually, Sam, someone said, is it best to have someone call the link line in order to find survivor counseling or get into shelter? And also, is the counseling free of charge?
Sure. No, great question. As far as, again, I'm partial to the link line. The national hotline is a great resource, but their resources are much more limited because they are covering like 50 states. I encourage people, especially if you're trying to get into counseling, shelter services, please call the hotline, the link line. We're happy to help. It is 24/7. We're able to assist folks getting connected to those resources. We have a much broader understanding of what is available in various communities because we live in those communities. So it's geographically, it's easier to work with folks. And yeah, when it comes to therapy services and stuff, depending on what resource they are accessing, the answer would be yes to free services. Like, for example, the domestic violence service providers, they are nonprofit organizations. They do not charge the people who are accessing the services to access the services. It's free to them. So those are definitely some options available. I mean, also various other community resources might have, if they're a nonprofit, they might have free resources, or they might have like sliding scale services or specific grants allocated to them for like therapy and stuff like that. So yeah, please, I mean, if you have questions around therapy resources and stuff, reach out. We're happy to help connect folks and explain what an individual organization might do for anybody. Yeah. Cool. Okay. And with this too, I'm a little less familiar with Break the Cycle. Andy, will you explain that as well?
Yeah, so Break the Cycle is another great resource for teen dating violence and dating violence in general. So many of our programs, that is a big ask or request, is teen dating violence curriculum, intervention, stuff like that. And here's a really great resource that you can go on and find out, you know, hey, what programs are out there, you know, what programs, you know, have good validity and reliability, what works, what's backed by, you know, research, and also, you know, get some other support services through that resource. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Then we also have the NNEDV, which, I mean, you're great at actually explaining this. I could, but will you just explain this one too?
Yeah, of course. So the National Network to End Domestic Violence. So their website has a number of different resources. A big part of their website that we generally use, and folks who reach out to us generally use, is the Safety Net project. And so that is about using technology to abuse, right? So they have a lot of toolkits, not only for survivors and advocates, but also App Safety Center. They have explanations of different ways that technology is used, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and other referrals and resources. Yeah. I couldn't suggest this one enough either.
Yeah, really, it's a great organization that has a lot of information, but really awesome. We rely on them for a lot of like technical assistance stuff and everything, like super fantastic. And then there's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It's a great resource, 24/7, access to more than 200 languages, phone and chat services are available. It's all across the US. Like I said, it's just a more broad resource. They just might not have the specifics that the link line might as a state hotline, but they're still a great resource and they're available if folks need it. Please encourage people to reach out if they need to. If they feel more comfortable that way, that's totally fine. Then you have the Strong Hearts Native Helpline, which is a really great resource for Native folks who have experienced, domestic violence and dating violence, stalking, all that stuff. An important thing to keep in mind with this, well, first off, is it's either
Native folks within the community taking these calls, or folks who have gone through very specific, culturally informed trainings on how to navigate the individual experiences of people within Native populations. One thing to note with it too is that it isn't a 24/7 hotline. It's 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Central Time. I do know with Utah and stuff, that like folks with like Urban Indian Center and stuff will encourage people, if they can't access the Strong Hearts Native Helpline within those hours, to call our link line. So we will take maybe like overflow calls and that stuff too. But yeah, really, really great resource for Native Americans in need of assistance with domestic and dating violence. And then UCASA, the Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault, very similar to what we do. As Andy was saying in the beginning of this, we have the sibling coalitions in the state of Utah, not the joint coalitions like some states have. So UCASA, they handle the sexual assault side of the abuse cases, working with similar to what we do, policy, funding, community education, stuff like that. There's also the Utah's 24-hour sexual violence crisis line that the folks can access right there, which might be, because there are differences in sexual assault advocates versus domestic violence advocates, technically in the state of Utah, that might be something that a survivor feels more comfortable accessing. That's okay. We like to inform people about it on our hotline, and they have the right to choose what service they access. And then Restoring Ancestral Winds is similar to, again, another sibling coalition. They are the Native coalition against domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, stalking, all that stuff. Very similar. They work within the Native communities to offer a similar assistance, make legislative change, things like that we might be doing at our coalition. And then there's always the link line. Again, I can't plug this one enough, but really, it's the 24/7 hotline for the state of Utah. We offer up to 150 languages. We are here to help folks. It's not a counseling service. We can't meet individuals in person. Our goal is to link people to services. And so if you have questions, like as an individual advocate or something, please reach out to us. We're happy to look into stuff. It's not just for survivors. We have family, friends, coworkers, social service workers, whatever, calling in all the time, asking us questions. So please, please, please reach out if you need to. You can find us on any social media platform, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, our website, some places to just check us out if you're interested. And yeah, if you want to contact us, this is Andy's information, which if you've been on webinars, I'm sure you are familiar with, but feel free to reach out to Andy as needed. They will obviously be reaching out to you in the near future after this webinar. And here I am with some stuff, doing some things. But yeah, here's my contact information. If you have any questions, link line related, anything like that, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help. Like I said, I'm not territorial. I do not want to, and my ultimate goal is to give people access to services to help survivors. And that's what I want to do. So please, if you have questions, reach out. And that is it. That's it for me. So yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sam. This was awesome. I learned a lot. I don't know how many times I've seen you present this, but every single time I learned more and more. Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, we can get those answered before Sam goes. Okay, so we actually did have a question just pop up. Sam, who should trans or gay men reach out to for their domestic violence issues, shelters, etc.?
Sure. Well, I mean, ultimately, like they can, first and foremost, I mean, anybody can reach out to our hotline. Andy is very well involved with LGBT trainings and gender socialization trainings for our advocates who take hotline calls. It's something that us at the coalition takes very seriously. We want everybody to be able to access resources. With the service providers, and Andy, maybe you can speak a little more specifically to this since this is sort of your wheelhouse, but the service providers should still be accessing and giving resources. And I say service providers like domestic violence service providers to all folks. discrimination is not something that we should be doing in any way. And so we want to get people connected to those resources. And at least in the capacity of the hotline, I've had really great success for me taking calls, being able to get gay or trans callers connected to resources that they feel are accessible.
Yeah, and so much of my work for the past couple years has been focused on increasing access for male survivors and queer and trans survivors. So of course, you know, contact the link line. You can also reach out to me if you are having any issues, any trouble, any hiccups. But serving all survivors is a grant requirement for federal grants, VAWA, FIPSA, and VAWA. So, no, I said, yeah, VAWA. So I said those the same thing. So VAWA, FIPSA, and VOCA, sorry. So many funding streams. So that is a grant requirement to serve everyone. Discrimination is not tolerated. It's not a part of grants. So if there are any issues or anything, you can definitely reach out to me. I can provide trainings. I can do technical assistance. I do everything from a trauma-informed lens. So I will meet that organization where they are and find out what barriers they are facing to help eliminate those barriers and to help them more effectively serve all survivors. So remember that you do have Sam and I as resources if you are experiencing any trouble, but that folks should be able to access those services at any of those resources, those shelters.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, please, like, again, if not just with queer and trans folk, but if you're seeing or experiencing limited access to resources based on just identity factors, that reach out to us. It's something obviously that we want to know about. It's something that we don't accept and want to be able to address that to make sure all survivors, all people who need assistance are able to access that.
Yeah, any other questions? These are really great questions. Thank y'all for asking these questions. All right, so thank you everyone for attending. It has been a pleasure like usual. We do not have a webinar next week, but the week after we will. So stay tuned. Check your email tomorrow for that link for the CEU quiz and to register for additional webinars. Have an excellent day. Keep on taking care of yourself and living your best life.